an ecosystem that has not had a lot of love and great attention. And I think it's a shame, because to me they're very, very beautiful.
Peatlands are environment habitats ecosystem where dead organic matter accumulates over time to form a thick deposit of peat. Here we have very cold season, so even in the summer it doesn't get very warm. It's very wet and humid throughout the year. All of this creates the conditions that are perfect for the plants to not decompose fully and build up that organic matter. By that process of taking up the carbon out of the atmosphere and building up those layers of peat and organic matter over time, they lock away the carbon from the atmosphere into the soil. And the carbon that's locked away into the soil, as long as it remains there, it's a really, really good thing, because it's not out in the atmosphere warming up the planet. The problem, of course, is when peatlands are not kept in these conditions and peatlands start to be degraded. What happens then is that all that carbon that's been locked away for thousands and thousands of years can start to be decomposed faster. If you drain a peatland, if you introduce air into a peatland, you take away the condition that allow peat to form, and then peat starts to decompose faster than it has been accumulating. And a degraded peatland therefore becomes a contributor to climate change rather than a place that can help us keep the carbon on the ground. Degradation across the peatlands in the UK are the consequence of past land uses, drainage that was put in the 20s and 30s when there was grant subsidies for increasing the agricultural productivities of the peatlands to have more sheep. But the peatlands have become degraded and they were not very productive for sheep either. After the Second World War, there was a shortage of timber across the UK, and because of that, there was very large-scale afforestation schemes, so non-native conifer plantation that were put, and some of them were put on the peatlands.
I don't think that the regular person in the street would realize just how important it is to keep this landscape as it is, because everyone knows about the rainforest and how it's important to preserve that. And I think it's also very easy for the general public to relate to beautiful trees and the things that you have right in front of you, but that it's the carbon under our feet that has been created over such long periods of time by a plant that is as modest and not very flashy as sphagnum. If you have a moss growing in a place where there's a lot of shade, it will start emitting certain chemical compounds, and those compounds will be picked up on by neighboring plants, and they will also start emitting this and preparing themselves for a difference in light, because plants, they need good light to grow because that's how they photosynthesize. And if you shade them, they can't do it as much. And in order to be prepared for that change in conditions that's less than ideal, plants are actually able to tell one another that, look, it's shady over here, we're not doing so well. You might want to get some defense mechanism working so that you can cope. And I think that's an amazing thing for such a small organism to do, to be able to sort of give the neighbor a little nudge saying, you know, we're having a problem over here, you might want to get ready for it. If it's getting too dry, the plant stops breathing for a bit, just so that the water loss is not accelerated. Even very simple plants like mosses, because in an evolutionary sense, they're not what we call higher plants, they're not very sophisticated or complicated. And at the same time, they have all these means of communicating with one another.
The peatlands function is a direct influence on the rivers themselves. All of our rivers are sourced in the flow country, so the water in them is vitally important and controlled and monitored and managed all by the natural ecosystem of the flow country. You go into climate change and the summers get hotter and we get more direct sunlight, the river's going to get hot. And salmon can't really survive in water higher than 23 degrees for any prolonged period of time. And the river only needs to be 18 degrees before they start to get quite stressed. We can hopefully promote people to restore peatlands, because peatlands are a great way of ensuring that you have water throughout the year. They kind of act like a big sponge. And they slowly release water at low flow events, where if you have it drained, you very rapidly lose water from the headwater, and then you end up with very low flows and you end up killing salmon. They're going to be quite significantly at risk, especially when you are in an environment which is determined on quite specific climatic features like the flow country.
A very large wildfire took place in 2019 It was in May, and it was a very dry spring before the fire, and it was huge. It burned over 6,000 hectares of blanket bog, and it was so big that you could fit all the other wildfires in the UK of that year within its footprint. The Fire Blanket project that looked at the impact of fire on all of these different land uses. What we found with this research is that degraded peatland are also much more vulnerable to the effects of a wildfire. Peatlands that are in really good condition have a really cool mechanism of resilience. The mosses at the surface of the peat and the very soft peat is able to drop if there's a drought. That basically compacts the peat, so when a fire's come through that, it doesn't burn as intensively and it only burns on the surface. If you have a degraded peatland, in a dry period, the surface doesn't have that dynamic elasticity. It can't collapse. And as a result, what happens is it cracks instead of collapsing. And because of that, when there's a fire, the fire takes hold in the cracks and starts to smolder and consume the peat rather than just burn over the surface. The trajectory that we're on is really bad. It's not good. We're not in a good place. We won't change the trajectory that we're on if we restore all the peatlands of the world tomorrow. But we definitely will be in a really bad place tomorrow if we don't start restoring the peatlands now. If we don't do anything, if we keep business as usual, the current rate of degradation of peatland means that they're contributing massively to climate change. And if we can't stop that, if we can't protect the peatland, restore the peatlands, we're just going to accelerate into a space where we'll be way beyond the 1.5 degrees that we should not exceed. The biggest challenge for peatland is that a lot of people don't really know them, and a lot of people don't really like them. Peatlands have been for a long time disregarded as ecosystem because they're not super charismatic. They don't have attractive species that can draw people in. They don't look particularly impressive from the surface, and most of the carbon is below ground, is invisible. I think if we can change that, if we can change the image of peatland and make people understand that peatland are not only really cool and really important, they're also extremely nice places to be in if you get closer and understand them a little bit better.
What I find very fascinating is that if I focus on like a patch of plant that's right in front of me, I get all absorbed and I think about it in a work type of way, in a research type of way. But every now and then I get to look up and then I get this wide view, and that I feel is almost like a gift that you can be so focused on little details, and then you still get all that space and all that sky above you.
I like how surprisingly colourful they are, especially at Christmas, because a lot of sphagnum can be red and green, so it feels like the peatland is just being Christmassy. But it's also beautiful in the autumn because you have the peatland grasses and they all go like pink, and you get some beautiful landscape views. I
love being in the bog. I love how it's open and big and I can see the landscape, the skies. I love the tiny things. I love the mosses. Sphagnum is one of my favorite plants in the whole world. I love that they're complex. I love that they're old. And I love that they're beautiful in their own way. With the changes in color, the textures that you have. I just love everything about peatland. If we want to be there to see the peatlands of the future, we need to do something today about it. We can't wait anymore. We really need to do something. One of the simple things that people can do is when they buy compost for their garden, make sure that they buy compost that is not made of peat. People can learn to enjoy the peatland and go out and explore and walk and try to understand a bit more. Because if people learn more about peatland and care more about peatland, they'll be better able to support policies and government that put in place the measures that can help put protection on peatlands. Caring about peatland means you care about your planet and you care about the people that live on the planet.